She heard Brandon say Courtney's name into a microphone in front of 250 people. She heard it the way you hear something you have already known for a long time, not as new information, but as the sound a door makes when it finally closes all the way. She had already called Reginald Ashford that morning. The Kellner Company anniversary gala was held on a Friday evening at a private golf club, 40 minutes outside Atlanta. The room had 14-foot ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows on the south wall that looked out over the course. The last light of October was going amber through those windows when the guests arrived. 160 people in business, formal, champagne in hand, a jazz quartet in the far corner playing something soft enough that you could hear yourself think, but present enough that silence never gathered in any one place long enough to become uncomfortable. The tables were dressed in ivory linen with small white orchid arrangements at each center. The air smelled of lily and cedar and the particular warmth of a room full of people who believe they are exactly where they are supposed to be. Imara Osei Boateng arrived with Brandon at 7:15. She wore a deep green wrap dress and low heels she could stand in for hours, and the silver bracelet on her left wrist that she had worn every day for 22 years, thin and plain, barely visible unless you knew to look. She had done her hair the way she did for every company event, gathered and clean, and she wore the small gold earrings Brandon had given her for their second anniversary, which she still wore, not from sentiment, exactly, but from a kind of honest commitment to finishing things she had started. She knew most of the people in that room. She had attended every company event for 9 years. She had stood beside Brandon at every handshake, every introduction, every toast. She had listened to the same stories from the same clients, a combined total of somewhere above 40 times. And she had listened well each time because she was someone who understood that attention was a form of respect and she did not give it carelessly. She took her seat at the head table. She lifted her champagne. She smiled at Diane, Brandon's mother, seated 2 chairs down, and Diane returned the kind of smile that requires effort to produce and leaves the person producing it unchanged. They had been performing this exchange for 9 years. Neither of them had stopped. The evening proceeded the way these evenings always proceeded, movement and noise, and the performance of ease among people who had not been fully at ease in years. Imara spoke to a client named Franklin, who always asked about her family with genuine warmth and who she had always liked for that reason. She accepted a second glass of champagne from a passing server. She watched the room with the particular attention she had developed over a long time, the kind that does not look like watching, the kind that takes in everything without commentary. The MC called Brandon to the stage at 8:45. Brandon walked up with the confidence he always carried in rooms like this, loose-shouldered and easy, the kind of confidence that fills a space before the person speaking has said a word. He took the microphone and smiled the way he smiled when he was enjoying himself, and the room settled into its listening posture, and he began to speak about the company, about 10 years of work, about the people who had believed in the vision when it was still mostly just a vision. Then he reached to his left, to the first row of seats closest to the stage, and he extended his hand toward Courtney Vance Holt. Courtney stood. She wore a red dress and had the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed composure and is pleased with how it sits on her face. Brandon brought her to stand beside him on the small stage. He placed his hand at the small of her back. He said into the microphone, to the entire room, that he wanted to acknowledge the person who had stood beside him and believed in this company, the person whose confidence had never wavered when his own came close to it. Imara was at the head table, 3rd seat from the left, 40 feet from the stage. She did not move. She held her champagne glass with both hands, her thumbs resting lightly on the stem. She did not look away from the stage. She watched Brandon with the same clear attention she gave to everything, without flinching, without the particular social reflex of pretending she had not understood what she was seeing. She understood it. She had understood it for a long time. On the triplicate folded program in front of her seat, someone had placed a printed name placard in the reserved guest holder beside Brandon's nameplate. It read Courtney Vance Holt in the same clean serif font as all the other table cards. Printed, not handwritten, ordered in advance, from the same vendor, at the same time as the rest of the event materials. Imara looked at it for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at her own name in front of her own seat. Diane, 2 chairs down, had not looked up from her conversation with a woman Imara recognized as a family friend. But she had glanced once at the placard, the small satisfied glance of someone confirming that something they arranged has been correctly executed. Imara looked at the stage. She set her champagne glass down. That was all she did. She set it down quietly, with no more force than it took to close a book. Derek, Brandon's brother, passed by the table midway through the evening and introduced Courtney to 2 men Imara recognized as long-standing clients, men she had spoken to at events for 9 years, men whose children's names she knew. He introduced her as Brandon's partner. He did not clarify. The men shook her hand and said it was great to finally meet her, and Derek smiled and moved on, and neither of them looked for Imara to include her in the introduction. She was standing 4 feet away. She heard every word. She did not move. She simply heard it and added it to the total. Later, near the end of the evening, Brandon moved through the room with Courtney beside him, working the crowd the way he always worked it, hand to hand, name to name, and he passed within 6 feet of the head table on his way from one side of the room to the other. He did not stop. He did not slow. He did not look at the chair where Imara had been sitting. The chair had been empty for 20 minutes by then. Imara was standing at the east windows, the ones that looked out over the dark course, holding a small plate from the buffet, eating unhurried and alone in the particular way of a person who has decided that their own company is sufficient for this moment and for many moments after it. She did not go home early. She stayed until the room began to thin. She said goodnight to Franklin. She thanked the catering manager by name, because she always did. She walked to the valet alone, because Brandon was still inside, and she drove home through 40 minutes of Georgia highway, the radio off, the heat on low. She parked in front of the house and sat in the car for 4 minutes. She was not crying. She was not deciding anything. Everything had already been decided. She was simply giving herself the 4 minutes, the particular grace of a pause before you walk back into your own life and begin the next thing. Then she turned off the engine and went inside. To understand what Imara was carrying that night, and what she had been carrying long before that night, you have to go back to red dirt roads and pecan trees and a house in Selma, Alabama, where a little girl sat on a wooden porch in the long heat of summer afternoons and received an education that no school she would ever attend could have given her. Her grandmother's name was Abena Osei, Nana Abena, she called her from the time she could form words. She was a woman who moved through the world with the particular deliberateness of someone who has made a decision long ago about what deserves her time and what does not, and has been organized around that decision ever since. She was not a loud woman. She was not a dramatic woman. She was, in the truest sense of the word, a consistent one, and Imara understood even as a very young child that consistency was the most powerful thing she had ever been close to. Imara's father died when she was 8. A cardiac event, fast and complete, the kind of loss that does not give you time to prepare and leaves the world afterwards subtly restructured, like furniture moved 2 inches in every room while you were sleeping. Her mother, Grace, worked double shifts at the county hospital and came home tired in the way that good people get tired when they are carrying more than their share and refusing to put it down. Nana Abena stepped in without announcement. The way she did everything, not with a declaration, but with presence, and Imara grew up, understanding that her grandmother was the steadiest thing available to her, and she should pay close attention to how that steadiness was maintained. Nana Abena taught her nothing in speeches. Every lesson came through action, through repetition, through being witnessed, doing the same things week after week, until the lesson became obvious, without ever being stated. She was a woman who fixed things when they broke and planted things she would not see, fully grown and saved money in ways that were never discussed at the table, but showed up quietly in the form of school fees paid on time and a house that was always in good repair. Every Monday, without fail, Nana Abena, dressed in what she called her business clothes, which were not fancy, but were pressed and intentional, the clothes of a woman, who understood that how you showed up for your own affairs was a form of respect for those affairs. She drove 22 minutes to the offices of Ashford and Meridian Estate Law in downtown Birmingham. She went in carrying a worn canvas tote bag that contained every document relevant to that week. She did not leave until every item had been reviewed, signed if necessary, filed if necessary, and confirmed. Then she drove home. She did this every Monday for 32 years. Imara went with her from age 7 until she left for college. She did homework at the small table in the waiting room. She did not fully understand what was being managed. She understood that it was being managed, carefully and without exception, and that it mattered, and that the reason it mattered was not for today but for later, for the specific kind of later that arrives in decades and not in months. She watched her grandmother shake Reginald Ashford Sr.'s hand every single Monday with the same firm, complete handshake, as if each meeting were both routine and important, which it was. Both things were true at once. Imara filed that away. On an August afternoon when Imara was 14, Nana Abena came home from the hospital. It was her first appointment after a cardiologist had found something in the results that needed watching. She sat down in the wide wooden chair on the porch, the one that had been in that spot since before Imara could remember, and she was quiet for a while. The fields behind the house were moving in a slow wind. The cicadas were loud in the tree line. A neighbor's dog was barking at something far off. The light was going from white to gold. Then Nana Abena reached across and took Imara's left wrist in both hands. She unclasped the silver bracelet she had worn every day for 25 years, the one with the 4 words engraved on the inner band in her mother's language from Ghana, and she fastened it around Imara's wrist, without a word. They sat together in the quiet for 2 full minutes. Then Nana Abena looked out over the field and said, without turning, without ceremony, in the same voice she used for everything, "The tree that survives the storm is not the tallest. It is the one with the deepest roots." She said it once. She did not repeat it or explain it or look at Imara to check whether it had landed. Then she stood up and went inside to start dinner, and the screen door closed behind her, and Imara sat on the porch with the bracelet warm on her wrist and the feeling that something important had just passed between them, though she could not yet name exactly what. She would spend the next 2 decades understanding it. What Imara did not know fully as a child, what she had not been equipped even while sitting in that Birmingham waiting room to entirely grasp, was the scale of what Nana Abena had spent her life building. The land had been the beginning. In 1971, with money saved across 7 years of careful work and 1 small inheritance from a great-uncle who had bought farmland in Georgia in the 1940s and held it the same patient way, Abena Osei had purchased a parcel of commercial land in rural Alabama at a price that required a courage disproportionate to the era. The county clerk who processed the paperwork had looked at her for a long moment before stamping it. She had looked back. The stamp came down. That was the first Monday. Through the 1970s, Nana Abena added 2 more parcels, small industrial lots on the edge of growing towns, bought below market because nobody else was looking at them the way she was looking at them, which was as seeds. Through the 1980s, as the South began to industrialize in new ways and distribution infrastructure started to crisscross the region, the corridors she had quietly positioned herself along became valuable in ways that rewarded her patience more than she had even projected. She did not sell. She held. She reinvested the income into the next property and the next. She kept every receipt, every survey document, every lease agreement in the canvas tote bag that lived on the same shelf in the same closet in Selma for 32 years. By the time Imara was born, Osei Land Holdings was already substantial. By the time Imara sat in that waiting room doing homework, it was significant. By the time Nana Abena fastened the bracelet on Imara's wrist, it was something that the law would one day describe in documents with language cold enough to hold the weight of it. That parcel became 2. 2 became a portfolio held with patience and managed with a discipline that the people around her did not witness because the work was done quietly, in offices, on Mondays, across decades. She invested in small industrial properties, warehouse space, agricultural land, distribution corridors in 5 southern states. None of it glamorous, all of it real, all of it appreciating across 50 years with the compound patience of a woman who understood deeply that the right kind of ownership did not need to be watched to grow. It needed to be protected. It needed to be documented. It needed to be left alone to become what it was going to become. The tree that survives the storm is not the tallest. Adaize Land Holdings, the limited liability company Nana Abena, established in 1983 with Reginald Ashford, the father, held everything. It had always held everything. Imara's name was added as sole successor when she was 18, during a Monday appointment at which Imara had sat not with her homework but with her full attention, beginning to understand what she had been watching all these years. She remembered signing the document. She remembered Reginald Ashford Sr. looking at her over the top of his reading glasses and saying, carefully, that she should understand what this meant. She said she understood. She meant it. When Imara was 22 and fresh from college with a business degree, she flew back to Birmingham and sat down with Reginald Ashford, the son, who had taken over the practice from his father, and she read every document in the Adaize Land Holdings file with the eyes of a person who now had the vocabulary to understand what she was reading. She did not speak for the first 20 minutes. She read. When she finished, she asked 2 questions about ongoing management obligations, thanked Reginald, shook his hand, and flew home. At 26, she added 2 additional commercial properties to the portfolio, using a portion of the small estate Nana Abena had left specifically for that purpose, and no other. At 29, she met Brandon Kellner at a real estate conference in Atlanta. He was confident and quick and funny in that particular way, of people who have learned that humor opens rooms, and she had agreed to dinner, and 6 months later they were engaged. And she had understood, in the clear-eyed way that she understood most things, that she loved him, and that this was a reasonable choice, and that it did not change anything about how she managed her own affairs. She did not tell him about Adaize Land Holdings. She did not decide not to tell him in a single moment of calculation. She simply did not, the way Nana Abena had simply not explained her Birmingham trips to anyone who had not asked directly. You did not explain the roots to the branches. You tended them. Brandon had never asked about her finances in any specific way. He had a professional's comfort with wealth as a general concept and a personal blindness to the specific arrangements of the person beside him. She had understood this about him very early. She had not held it against him then. The marriage was good for 3 years. Then it became something she adapted to. Then it became something she moved alongside rather than within, like 2 rivers running parallel that share a bank but not a current. Brandon's ambitions had inflated in ways that did not quite match what he was actually building, and the gap between those 2 things had made him first restless, then irritable, then prone to the particular cruelty of men who cannot locate the source of their own dissatisfaction and so direct it outward at whatever is closest and most patient. She had been the closest. She had been the most patient. There were specific moments she could name, though she rarely did, even to herself. The company dinner, where he had interrupted her mid-sentence to contradict something she had said to a client, not because she was wrong, but because he needed to be the one who was right. The family vacation she had planned for 3 months, that he abbreviated by 2 days, because something at the office needed him. Except nothing needed him. She had checked. The way he had stopped asking her opinion on things and started announcing decisions, small ones first and then larger ones, as if the consultation had become more trouble than it was worth. These were not dramatic events. They were a pattern. Patterns are how real things end. The phone on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up at 11:17 on a Tuesday night, Courtney's name appearing 3 times in 2 minutes while Brandon was in the shower, was not the moment she understood the marriage was over. It was the moment she stopped needing to be careful about when she placed the call. She called Reginald Ashford the following Thursday morning. She said, "Reg, I need to know exactly where everything stands. All of it." He said, I will have the full summary ready by Friday morning, she said. Thank you. She hung up and went to make breakfast for Brandon, who came downstairs looking at his phone, and the morning proceeded the way most mornings in that house had been proceeding for the past 2 years, efficiently and without warmth. 2 people sharing a kitchen without sharing much else. She let the days pass without disturbing them. She had no reason to. The call she received Friday morning lasted 14 minutes. She had driven to the public library for privacy, parked on the second level of the garage, and sat with the windows down while Reginald read to her from the updated summary. When he finished, she sat with her hand over her mouth for a long time, not from shock, but from the specific weight of a number she had watched grow across 22 years of her own careful tending, and had not fully inhabited until Reginald Ashford spoke it into the warm, still air of that parking. Karaja, $42 billion. Across 5 states, fully protected, fully hers. Reg, she said quietly, I need you to come to Atlanta. There is something we need to do in person. They spent 3 hours together the following Tuesday. By the time she drove home, every preparation had been set in motion, quiet and complete, like a Monday morning in Birmingham, like a screen door closing gently behind someone who knows exactly where she is going. She just had one more thing to wait for. The Kellner Family Legacy Gala had been Brandon's idea, organized over 2 months and built around an announcement he was proud of. He intended to establish a charitable foundation in the Kellner name, focused on education funding in the Atlanta area, to be seeded with a significant gift drawn from combined marital assets. He had spoken about it at dinner, at family gatherings, at the company office. He had invited 250 people, press included, to witness the announcement in a ballroom at the Whitmore Hotel in downtown Atlanta on a Thursday evening in November. He had invited his own unveiling without knowing it. His attorney had needed, in the course of setting up the foundation's financial structure, to run a full accounting of marital assets available to endow the gift. The process had surfaced exactly what it was designed to surface. Brandon's attorney had called Brandon that morning with questions Brandon could not answer. Brandon, in the manner of a man who does not like questions he cannot answer, had grown impatient and then dismissive and told his attorney they would sort it out after the event. His attorney had then called Reginald Ashford directly, as a professional courtesy, to ask whether there was anything he should know before his client took the stage. Reginald had said, I would suggest you advise your client that this evening may not proceed as he has planned, but that is your conversation to have. Mine will be with the room. Brandon did not hear about this call until after. Imara arrived at the Whitmore Hotel 40 minutes before the event opened. She wore a long navy dress, clean and unadorned, and low heels she had owned for 6 years. The silver bracelet was on her left wrist, visible, not tucked under a sleeve as she sometimes kept it in formal settings. She requested the seat she had been assigned, table 1, left side, 3rd chair from the center, and she sat down with a glass of water and watched the room fill. She watched Diane arrive with Derek and Simone, the 3 of them moving together with the energy of people expecting something favorable to happen and wanting to be positioned close to it. She watched Courtney come in at 7:40 in a fitted charcoal dress, scanning the room with the practiced ease of someone who has spent a long time learning to look as if she belongs everywhere. She watched the press representatives take their seats at the back. She watched Reginald Ashford arrive at 7:52 and take the aisle seat at table 2, close to the podium, exactly where she had arranged for him to sit. She touched the bracelet once, lightly, with the tips of her right fingers. The tree that survives the storm is not the tallest. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Brandon took the stage at 8:30 with the ease of a man who believes the evening has been constructed for him, which it had, only not in the way he understood. He welcomed the room. He spoke about legacy and intention and the particular satisfaction of building something that outlasts you. He said that tonight he wanted to announce something that he hoped would reflect the values his family stood for. He said the word family. Reginald Ashford stood up. He did not require a microphone. The ballroom was not large enough to need one, and Reginald Ashford had spent 31 years learning to speak in rooms where what was being said mattered more than how loudly it was said. He said, "Mr. Kellner, before this foundation is announced publicly, there is a matter of record the room should be aware of." He opened his leather portfolio. He removed 3 pages, notarized and dated. Without drama, without any elevation in his tone, he read a condensed legal summary of the structure and assets of Adaize Land Holdings, Limited Liability Company, registered in the state of Alabama, Imara Adaize Boateng, sole owner and managing member. He read the asset valuation. He read the protection clause, prepared and filed by Abina Adaize in 1997 and updated in 2019, which precluded by name any spouse, partner, or claimant by marriage from accessing, contesting, attaching to, or benefiting from any portion of the estate in full and permanent compliance with applicable law. The room was completely still. Brandon stood at the podium with the microphone held at his side, not raised and not lowered, just held. Imara stood up. She did not move quickly. She came to standing the way she did most things, without excess motion, without announcement. She looked at the 250 people in that room. She looked at Reginald, who gave her a small nod. Then she spoke to the room in the clear, unhurried voice of someone who has had this conversation inside herself for a very long time and no longer needs to rehearse it. "My grandmother, Abina Adaize, spent 51 years building something. She did not build it loudly. She built it correctly. What Reginald just read is the result of that work. Adaize Land Holdings has operated across 5 states for over 5 decades. It has never been hidden from the law. It has simply been private. The foundation you are here to celebrate tonight does not have the legal standing to proceed as proposed because the assets Mr. Kellner intended to draw from are not his to draw from. My attorney will be in contact with his by Monday morning. That is all I have to say." She sat down. For a moment the room held a silence so complete it had its own texture. Then, from table 4, a woman stood up. Her name was Grace Adaize Mensah. She was 73 years old and had known Nana Abina since 1968. She had driven 3 hours from Selma that morning because Imara had called her the week before and asked if she would come. She did not clap immediately. She just stood, still and upright. Then a man at table 6 stood. Then 2 women at table 8. Then the sound began, uneven and real, the kind of applause that comes from something witnessed rather than something performed, spreading from that corner of the room outward like light, spreading from a window someone just opened. Brandon Kellner stood on the stage and did not move. He held the microphone at his side and looked at the room the way you look at something that has stopped making sense while you were watching it. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes went to Imara once, and Imara looked back at him with calm and nothing else, the particular calm of a woman who has already moved through the grief in private and has nothing left to perform for anyone. Then she looked away. Courtney Vance Holt had already reached the exit by the time the applause was at its fullest. She did not run. She moved with the quiet efficiency of a person who has done a rapid recalculation and found the result decisive. The architecture she had attached herself to did not exist in the way she had believed it did. She was a practical woman. She walked through the door, and she did not come back. Diane Kellner remained in her chair at table 3, program held in both hands with a grip tighter than the occasion required. She did not stand. She did not clap. She was not a woman who lost composure in public, and she would not lose it now. But the room she had walked into expecting to be the mother of the evening's honoree, and the room she was sitting in right now were 2 different rooms, and the distance between them had arrived in the space of 4 minutes. Derek and Simone did not speak to anyone for the remainder of the evening. 8 months later, on a Tuesday morning in early fall, Imara was at her desk in the east-facing room on the 2nd floor of the house she had purchased on her own, 2 hours south of Atlanta, 90 minutes from Selma. The room was small and functional. It had a window that faced the morning light, and she had come to organize her thinking around that light, the way certain people organize themselves around something dependable. A stack of documents from Ashford and Meridian lay on one side of the desk. Her coffee was half finished on the other. A large format map was unrolled across the center. 5 states outlined in blue marker, 17 locations marked with small circles in red. In the bedroom at the end of the hall, Marcus, her 8-year-old great-nephew, the son of a cousin she had lost 3 years ago, was still asleep. He would be up in 20 minutes, which meant breakfast and a packed lunch and a permission slip signed for the school field trip on Thursday, all of which were ordinary things she would do with the same steady attention she gave everything else. She picked up the pen and signed the last authorization on the final page of the stack. Adaize Land Access Initiative, Phase 1. A community program designed to help Black families in Alabama and Georgia access commercial land ownership for the first time, structured around the exact model Nana Abina had used, patient and technical and correct in all the ways that mattered. It was Imara's own design, not inherited, begun by her. Hers. Brandon Kellner was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Buckhead. His company had contracted over the 6 months following the gala as 3 major partnership agreements dissolved. His name still appeared on the company website. His phone rang less than it used to. He was not destroyed. He was diminished in all the ways that resist argument, because they are the natural result of the record of a man's own conduct, visible now to people who had not been paying attention before. There is a specific kind of professional consequence that arrives not from a single event but from a room full of people simultaneously revising their assessment of you, and there is no legal remedy for it, and no PR strategy that addresses it, because it is simply the truth catching up to the impression. His attorney had sent a letter through Reginald Ashford's office 2 weeks after the gala, inquiring about the scope of the marital estate. The response had been 4 pages long, precise, and final. Brandon's attorney had read it twice and called Brandon with a tone of voice that Brandon had never heard from him before, careful and flat. The voice of a man delivering news he has accepted but has not yet decided how to frame. There was nothing to pursue. There was nothing to contest. Adaize, through her granddaughter and through Reginald Ashford, the father, had closed every door 30 years before anyone thought to knock on them. Diane Kellner still called Derek on Sundays. The warmth she had once distributed with calculation to the people most useful to her son no longer found the same return. The family did not gather at her table for holidays anymore. This was not Imara's decision. It was what happens when children grow old enough to read the room they have been sitting in for years and understand what they were watching. Diane had made choices every day for 9 years, small choices, looks and seating cards and the practiced warmth she had never once extended to the woman her son had married. Those choices had accumulated. They had compounded, the same way everything compounds over time, into a consequence she had not projected. Courtney Vance Holt had relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, with the quiet efficiency she had shown the night she walked out of that ballroom. No one in this story heard from her again. Simone had left a voicemail once, 4 months after the gala. 17 seconds, hesitant at the start and incomplete at the end. Imara had listened to it once, set the phone face down, and returned to what she had been doing. There was no cruelty in this. There was only the clear-eyed recognition that some structures have to be assessed for what they actually are, rather than what they presented themselves as being. That morning in the East Room, when the last page was signed and the pen was set down, Imara looked up from the map and out through the window at the October sky. The light was full and clean and generous. The red and yellow at the tree line were not quite at peak. Another week, maybe 10 days. Without thinking about it, the way a body returns to what it has learned to find, her right fingers moved to the bracelet on her left wrist. She held it the way she had held it for 22 years, the silver warm from her skin, the inner band worn smooth in the places where the engraved letters had been touched so many times they had softened at the edges. She thought about a porch in Selma. She thought about August heat and the particular quality of light at 4 in the afternoon when the cicadas are loud and the field is moving in a slow wind. She thought about being 14 years old and receiving something from the wrist of a woman she trusted completely, without fully understanding the weight of what was being transferred, only understanding that it was real and that it was meant for her, and that she should carry it accordingly. She thought about Nana Abena going inside to start dinner afterward, screen door closing behind her, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. She understood now, from the other side of living it, that it had not been casual. It had been the most deliberate thing that woman had ever done. Every Monday in Birmingham had been leading to that porch. Every signature, every filed document, every quietly tended parcel across 5 southern states had been pointing toward one afternoon in August. One wrist, one bracelet, one sentence, said without drama to a girl who was ready to receive it, even if she could not yet prove it. She thought about what it meant that a woman who spent her whole life building something in silence had spent her last years making certain that what she built would land in the hands of the right person. Not the loudest person, not the most visible person, the one with the deepest roots, the one who had sat in a waiting room every Monday for 12 years and absorbed without being told what patience in the service of something real actually looked like. She thought about the bracelet itself, the specific warmth of it against her skin, the way the silver had changed color ever so slightly over 22 years from being worn against a living body every day. She thought about how Nana Abena's wrist had looked without it the last time she saw her, thinner and bare, and how she had wanted to give it back, and had understood without asking that the direction of that transfer was permanent. She thought about the gala for exactly 3 seconds, not with anger, not with satisfaction of the kind that needs an audience. She thought about it the way you think about a storm that came through and rearranged things and is now passed on, and what remains is not the storm, but the clearer sky that comes after, and the particular green smell of everything that survived. She was not angry about the golf club dinner in Atlanta. She had moved through that a long time ago, in her kitchen at night, in the car on the highway, in the private country inside herself, where the real processing always happened. What she felt now was something she was still learning to inhabit fully, something that on mornings like this one, with the light coming in clean, and the map spread out before her, and the work she had chosen beginning in earnest, felt very much like peace. Not the absence of pain, something better than that, the knowledge that the pain had not made her into something smaller than she was, that she was still, after all of it, the girl from Selma who sat in a Birmingham waiting room every Monday and paid attention, that she was still, after all of it, the woman her grandmother had trusted to carry something real. Marcus called from the hallway. His voice was rough with sleep. He wanted to know if there was cereal. She called back that there was. She capped her pen. She folded the corner of the map so she would know where she had left off. She went downstairs to make breakfast. The deepest roots are the ones they never thought to look for. If your grandmother ever told you something you did not fully understand until years later, drop that one word below. Just one word. I will read every single one.